Books in Oxford, Mississippi. Thank you so much for joining us today. I've got a few upcoming announcements of events. We got a very busy week next week. We have on Monday, Melissa Ginsburg, who teaches here at Ole Miss, has her second novel, The House Uptown, and that'll be at 5:30. She'll be in conversation with Maurice Carlos Ruffin, who is the Grisham visiting writer in residence this year. That'll be at 5:30 as on Zoom. Unfortunately, we're still doing the not in-person events, but it's still great. So you can RSVP at squarebooks.com for that. On Tuesday, we have Ralph Eubanks, a native Mississippian, with his wonderful book, A Place Called Mississippi. And he'll be in conversation with our own Richard Howarth. And that's at 5 o'clock. That's Tuesday. And then next Thursday at 6 o'clock, we have another faculty member, Joe Atkins, with his book, Harry Dean Stanton, Hollywood's Zen Rebel. And he'll be in conversation with our own Ace Atkins. And that's at 6 o'clock. You can check our event schedule and sign up to attend those using the RSVP at squarebooks.com. We have signed copies of all those. Also, I should mention, I don't know if y'all have heard, but John Grisham has a surprise spring novel called Sully, which is his basketball novel. He's done baseball, football, and now basketball. And check our website for details on that. But essentially, if you think we're having it at noon on the 26th, the day before the release, and if you pre-order a book and pay for it, you'll be able to attend that event and have a chance to win a basketball signed by John Grisham. So a lot of fun stuff coming up. But tonight we're here for our homeboy Lee Durkee and his novel, The Last Taxi Driver, which just came out in paperback. This is a part of the Oxford Conference for the Book. The events that we're doing in conjunction with the Oxford Conference for the Book sadly couldn't be in person, but they got some great stuff online at oxfordconferenceforthebook.com that you can check out. And so we're very lucky today to have Lee Durkee with Craig Popelars, old friend of the store. Normally we'd be doing the Oxford Conference for the Book and having a big 3-day festival and fun times and going to City Grocery and Proud Larry's and whooping it up. But this will have to do. And we really wanted to bring in Craig. He's an old friend. He's the publisher of Tin House. Previously, he was with Algonquin for, I think, about 25 years. He, stewarded the careers and helped launch Larry Brown, Julia Alvarez, Lee Smith, Tayari Jones, and many more. And now he's with this great indie press, one of our favorites, Tin House, located in Washington. He even moved the whole family up there. And so we're very excited to have Craig in conversation with Lee Durkee. As I said, he's the author of The Last Taxi Driver, which just came out in paperback. He's one of our favorite writers. I don't know if you can see this. This is the new cool paperback cover here, which I think looks awesome. Lee is a native of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, author of Rise of the Midway, and has been written and published in many publications such as Oxford American and Garden and Gun, and I believe he's working on a forthcoming memoir that we're pretty excited about. But we were very excited when Lee moved to Oxford, and just very excited for him to have this new novel out. And we thought it'd be great if Lee could be in conversation with our old friend Craig Poplar. So we do have signed copies of The Last Taxi Driver. So if y'all want to get some of those, they're actually signed, no book plates. One of the beauties of having a local author here. And we're really excited to have these guys in conversation. If you have a question, you can post in the chat, but right now I'm going to turn it over to Craig and Lee and let them talk a little bit. And thank you all for joining us. Lee and Craig.
Thanks, Cody.
How y'all doing?
Appreciate this. And thank you to the entire staff at Square Books for hosting this, and for the Oxford conference for the book. I think, Cody, the last time we were together, I think we were running around a cemetery in Oxford with Richard and Lisa and about 30 other booksellers from around the country around midnight. And I think we all had bourbon, and which was a pretty outstanding.
I try all of that.
How can you forget that?
No,
cemetery at midnight,
it's
bourbon.
absolutely true. And I remember when you came down for the Oxford conference of the book, celebrating Larry. Was that time?
That was an amazing experience. I just, with Alejandro Escovedo and Clyde Edgerton, and just, having that experience of fishing in Larry's pond with his sons will always be a highlight of my career, is that Oxford conference to celebrate Larry in that way. So,
well, come back anytime. I think I can get in touch with those boys and we go fishing again. So when all this is over, please come back.
And thank you guys for just doing an amazing job of promoting Lee and his novel to the greater community down there. I have to say, the package on the paperback, that it actually goes on sale officially April 6th. So if you're selling it now, you're beating everybody else to the punch in Oxford, which is pretty amazing. But one of the things, and Diane is our art director here, just an outstanding job. But the hardcover, we were talking about this earlier. If you take the jacket off the hardcover, there's just this sort of Willy Wonka sort of golden ticket impression on the cover. And I just feel like it's an absolutely beautiful book. So if anybody does have the hardcover and you've never taken off the cover of it, this is the beauty that you find behind it, which is just like a beautiful just piece of work. So
we still got signed copies of that too. And I remember Lee showing me that little detail, because I read the arc, and then I saw that, and that just is a testament to what a great job y'all do and what effort you put into your books.
Thank you. So I'm just gonna ask a simple question to Lee. This one's an easy one for you. Why not 662 on that T-shirt you're wearing?
I'm 802. I'm farming myself off, hoping to get bids from another state. And another book came out.
That's the Vermont area code, right?
Yeah,
that's
not
Vermont.
But
Oxford
I'm born in Hawaii, so I'm willing to take bids.
Okay.
But I'm ready to move on. Another book came out today about Mississippi writers, and once again, I wasn't in it, and I just thought, time to move on. So, Cody can maybe accept the bids as we go along, as different states weigh in. But I'm cheap. I won't cost much.
That's great. Hey, Lee, why don't you kick it off for everybody who might not be familiar with The Last Taxi Driver? Sort of give them an elevator pitch, introduce the book, sort of set up the conversation.
I think I would be good at that by now. But I always wanted to write a day in the life type of novel. I love movies that way, and I love books that are that way. So I just kind of went with that and tried to really cram everything crazy that had happened to me as a cab driver into one day or a day and a half, as it turned out, because it was just too much craziness for one day. And that was the premise. And to try to keep it with enough plot, which is a difficult thing to do when you're writing a taxi, because it's a haphazard job by nature, and have the true evolution that I went through every day as a cab driver, from starting off intending to be kind and happy throughout the day, intending to be helpful to people, and then evolving through the road rage and into the stage, it's post-road rage, which is this great release, almost zen-like, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to capture all of that in one day, in almost a documentary type effect. I don't know whether I pulled that off or not, but that was the attempt. And to do that, I had a character named Lou, who's a lot like me, but maybe hopefully a little bit more centered and interesting. And he certainly curses better than I do. So I had to work really hard on the cursing. I thought cursing would come really easy to me inside the book, but it really proved one of the most difficult aspects of writing it is getting the cursing right.
Well,
so
and
that's
so
the best
you
I can
had
do
this
for an
entire
elevator pitch.
lifetime to experience this. Do you really think it was fair to shove that all into Lou in like, a 24, 48-hour period, one book? Like you had a lifetime. Now you're like, you threw that all on Lou, all in one sitting, more or less, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not fair, and I've often thought about how there are type of writers who torture their characters to death.
Yeah.
Shakespeare among them. Shakespeare created the most, and I'm not comparing myself to Shakespeare, but everybody reads him, and he created the most beautiful characters in the world, and tortured them to the point they were just praying and begging for suicide. Um, my book has a lot more humor than the tragedies do, and but essentially Lou goes through a lot.
Mhm.
He's pretty miserable.
So,
Um,
so is that why we see sort of in there, hanging from the rear view mirror, a Shakespeare air freshener? Uh,
Lou inherits my passions and eccentricities to some degree,
okay.
and yeah, I've long been consumed with not just Shakespeare, but with Elizabethan portraits. That's one of my weird obsessions, and so I put that in with Lou. He's a Shakespeare fan as well, but really, my obsession with Shakespeare centers around portraits, the 400-year-old portraits said to be Shakespeare, and I've been desperately trying for 2 decades now to be the first person to find a portrait of Shakespeare painted from life. And I've come so close, Craig. I've come so close, and I thought I had him so many times, but he always turns out to be a dead end. It seems like.
Yeah.
So yeah, Lou inherits my obsessions.
Well, and it seems like the way the Shakespeare air freshener comes up, it almost like Lou needs to center on that a couple times throughout the novel, where he looks up at it, and there's some kind of like spiritual meditative or something like that, if it's a centering or something. But I noticed Lou looking up and taking that in. I wasn't sure what was behind that, if that's something personal to you, where you always come back to sort of a Shakespeare when it comes to centering. But I picked that up as a reader of Lou's, like just taking a look at that swinging from the rear view.
Huh, that may be true. There's also a Bigfoot air freshener and a
Right,
UFO freshener, which are
right.
equally important to Lou. So I think it's, that's like his trinity. And
Yeah,
so I don't want to highlight one over the other.
sure. Let me ask this. You probably read this, but I guess it was last April, John T. Edge wrote a piece in Garden and Gun called The Last Waiter. And it was about sort of, he references your book in that piece. I'm not sure if you read it, but it's really about sort of those who serve in restaurants and beyond in the service industry. And in many ways, especially in challenging times like COVID, what is really pushed on the service industry in a lot of ways, and the people that are continuing to have to do the work there. In this case, John was referring to a waiter at City Grocery. But in many ways, this is, I guess it was your character, Lou, where it really got him thinking about people that serve in the industry and how in many ways they're overlooked and sometimes disenfranchised. And we see that with Lou. Can you talk a little bit about sort of Lou and being in this, because he is, as a person, he's setting out to do the right thing. He's helping people get from the hospital or out of the hospital. And in many ways, it was a really beautiful piece that John wrote. And looking at your novel in that way, in that contemplative way.
Well, I mean, the cab company I worked for, and therefore similarly, but not exactly, that Lou, my narrator, works for, has a contract with the local hospital. So when somebody gets kicked out of the hospital for being too poor, and this being Mississippi in America, that happens. We were the ones that picked them up and drove them to wherever they lived in the state. And the Delta was quite often where we ended up. And these were very poor people, and they were very sick people.
Mhm.
And, we would literally have to lift them up out of the cab take them up to their trailer parks or whatever and just leave them there and hope somebody's taking care of them. And that is part of the service industry you don't think much about, but the waiters in town, the bartenders in town, and everything they've gone through, the book kind of gelled into that nicely, I think, because Lou does have this background as being a bartender, working in restaurants, as do I. I was raised by restaurants entirely. Started off at Pasquale's Pizza I started off at Dipper Dan when I was 13 for $1.20 an hour. Then I went to Pasquale's for $1.40 an hour, and this was in Hattiesburg. So I did not have a good home life. So I migrated to the restaurants where I worked 40, 50 hours a week throughout high school, so I didn't have to go home. So I just stayed in those restaurants. So I'm a child of restaurants. So hopefully my novel conveys my admiration for people that can put up with customers, especially in Mississippi, where they can test you as they are during COVID, where people rip off your mask, people get mad at you for not wearing a mask. People are constantly rude to you for wearing a mask. And it's just inexcusable, and it's their everyday process. They have to put up with it. Now, I don't know how they do. I don't understand that level of patience. And that's Lou's dilemma. He can read and concentrate. He calls himself the world's worst Buddhist. And he got that from me too. And you can be an intellectual Buddhist, but that doesn't help you in those moments when you need patience with people and you're out of it. The tank is dry.
Yeah.
And so my admiration for waiters, waitresses, bartenders, etc., is just immense, and for cab drivers too, obviously.
I love how he said in the piece, those who serve humanity, and I see that a lot.
John Key, yeah.
In a lot of ways, and what he does in that way, and how it's sometimes overlooked. So it was a really nice piece how it brought your book into that kind of larger conversation. When you're talking about work, I had the opportunity to talk with writer and musician Willie Vlaughton a couple weeks ago about his forthcoming novel that's coming out in April. And both of you guys worked just numerous kind of jobs in the industry. I think Willie and you seem to be sort of conjoined twins in a lot of ways, and you explore these themes in both your novels. And what really came out is reading your novel, reading Willie's, is sort of people that are being left behind by a new economy, that are struggling to try to hold on to their part of the American dream. They're trying to chase it down, but everything is moving too fast. In Willie's book, it was the gentrification that's happening here in Portland, Oregon, that's pushing a lot of people out. And in your book, you're seeing it with the emergence of Uber, for instance, and Lyft, and what's that doing to an industry that you've been a part of for so long. But you guys write about it from working very close to the bone as well. I mean, you guys have been painters and bartenders, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, interestingly enough, I used to be for years the official driver for the Oxford conference of the book. So I got to drive the writers back and forth from Memphis, which is an hour and 15 minutes. So I gave Martin Amis a ride once, and he was a hero. And Willie Vlaughton, another hero, I gave a ride to. I don't think, I don't announce myself like, hey, I'm a writer too. But we just talked about books. Right. And I had a great conversation with him, in which I really the conversation did me good, because we talked about the overuse of violence in modern fiction, and how a lot of people who don't know much about violence write a lot of violence, and they write books that go from one violent scene to the next. And you call that structure a plot or rising action, whatever. And we talked about how people who've actually experienced horrible violence know how traumatic each individual episode is and how it reverberates throughout a lifetime. And therefore, people who've actually experienced violence don't tend to write about it as much. Occasionally violence will come in, but I think there's a lot more restraint in that. And that's something that Willie and I talked about. And it really helped me to hear him say that. and he said it pretty passionately. And so we hit it off. And that is the only time I've met him, other than kind of hanging around him at the Oxford conference of the book and seeing him perform. But I'm a fan of the Motel Life, and I haven't got to Don't Skip Out on Me yet, but that's big on my list, and I'm a fan of his. And so I'm glad you brought him up specifically, because we are quite a bit alike.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I really appreciate about both your works is that representation of an underrepresented voice in a lot of ways. And I think you do that so well with Lou, and in Willie's new novel, The Night Always Comes, the same way with his character is watching those struggles that are real, that happen every single day, that a lot of us aren't attuned to. And I think both of you have brought that to the forefront of the conversation through your novels. So
well, thank you for saying that, because that's a compliment to me. Thanks.
let me ask this. So Lou is a practicing Buddhist, maybe a struggling Buddhist, and it sort of defines him in a lot of ways. But the work itself, he brings up towards the end of the novel, I remember, an opposite Buddha, and the exploration of this opposite Buddha. And in a lot of ways, he is trying to do his very best of practicing Buddhism, but everybody that comes into the car really pushes his faith in that way, or his spirituality in that way. Can you talk a little bit about the Buddhism and even the opposite Buddha that you bring up towards the end of the novel?
Yeah, well, I think at one point Lou points out that if the Buddha had met some of his customers, he would have left the forest and become a bounty hunter.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where my Buddhism. There's a moment where compassion runs dry, and the idea in Buddhism is that Buddhism starts in the head. Compassion starts in the head and migrates to the heart, and that it's an intellectual muscle you have to flex.
Yeah.
Which sounds great on paper until you're dealing with your 20th crazy customer of the day, and then it really is meaningless. Some people are born naturally compassionate and nurturing, and some of us really have to work hard to be that way. We have to be self-aware that maybe we're not as compassionate as we should be, and to remind ourselves of the importance of that. And that's all an intellectual activity, reinforcement you have to do. And that's part of a practice of Buddhism. It understands that people aren't perfect and they aren't naturally compassionate. Compassionate is being mindful. And the idea is to be mindful enough to where you're always compassionate. And good luck with that. I thought it was pretty good at being compassionate before I started driving a cab. And it was very sobering to realize how much further I had to go. I wasn't the person I wanted to be when I was driving a cab. And so it's a luxury to think of yourself as evolved, et cetera, in some regards. But in truth, the service industry will test you. And I called my cab company All Saints. And that's kind of what I think of people in the service industry, because what they do, and yeah, I've done it, but it's still unfathomable to me. I don't see how they do it day in, day out. And I don't see how they do it over the course of a career. And the compassion and the friendliness they show, it's not always heartfelt, but even that superficial effort is important. When you can't be kind from the heart, be kind from the face, right? And they're so good at that. And it's such an admirable quality. I'm in awe of it. I don't have it myself that well.
Speaking of the opposite Buddha, one of my favorite chapters in the novel is titled "Never Blink Your Headlights at a UFO and Other Driving Tips for Mississippians." First of all, I felt like when I read that chapter, a lot of those tips could be applied to almost any state.
Yes, I hope so.
But and some of them are just hilarious. Some of them are spot on. Some of them really you see Lou's anger with his experiences on the road and the idea of how people should be conducting themselves on the road. Just personally, what are your pet peeves as as somebody that spent that much time behind the wheel, like your top pet peeves when it comes to bad driving in Mississippi or anywhere.
Well, the top pet peeve is always the guy who passes you and goes slow.
Right.
Like you pass me and then you go 5 miles per hour slower than I was going. I mean, that's like instant road rage. It's like I've never even heard of the Buddha at that point. I'm like, there's just not enough middle fingers in the world for that activity. So that's the number one thing. And people do that so often. It's crazy. But I wanted to include that section because I figured no matter what else about the book, if people read it, I was going to save lives because those are some pretty good driving advice. That's a good list. I worked hard on that. So I figured if even just 100 people read the book, I'll save one life. And that was kind of a good Buddhist thing to put in the book, I felt, because they are good driving. Yeah. And I tried to include the themes of the book in the driving rules as well. And of course, the prominent one, and maybe the most important, is actually don't blink your headlights at a UFO because you'll get messed with. You really will. I've read all sorts of UFO stuff. Invariably, the moment you blink your headlight at a UFO, that thing is going to be hovering over your car. Your car's going to be shaking and rattling, and don't do it. It's going to be tempting if you see one, but don't blink your headlights.
So what's the fascination there? Because I love that part because as a child of the 70s, it was impossible to watch a television show without UFOs. And when I was in grade school, my friends and I belonged to a club called the UFO Club. And it was all about, and it was just everything from Loch Ness to Bigfoot to Stonehenge. And then to see somebody like Lou, who still, there's a belief out there. And there's got to be something more that UFOs symbolize to Lou. And there was a piece, I think I wrote it down, where he said something about, I've been looking for them all my life. And I think when you said that, there's something about the UFOs. It's not just the experience of, extraterrestrial, but this means something more, that there's something out there for Lou, possibly.
Yeah. Well, like you, Lou's a child of the 70s. So he was raised in a time when UFOs were actually making headline news. And the biggest UFO of them all practically was in Pascagoula, Mississippi.
Right.
And it put Mississippi on the map. Mississippi was known for Faulkner, racism, and the Pascagoula UFO incident. And so Lou was steeped in UFOs, and there's a spiritual aspect to UFOs as well, because they're tied in with who we are. I've never understood people who aren't interested in UFOs if they believe in them. If you don't believe in them, then I get it. But if you believe in them, then we're tied up with them. Understanding of ourselves is tied in with an understanding of who are they and what impact have they had on us, if any. And so I think there's that spiritual aspect that Lou feels towards UFOs. And plus he's haunted by them. He keeps seeing them. And so that reinforces it.
Yeah, he actually calls himself, I think, the UFO whisperer in one of the latter sections of the book, which somebody that
maybe should have cut that line down.
The UFOs in a lot of ways. So you're like, I don't remember that. I'm like, it's there, believe me.
No, I believe you. Yeah,
I've seen it.
I don't have the ability to even look at something I've written after it's been solidified into print. It's just impossible. So
well, let me ask this. When you're in a car and behind the wheel, I noticed in the novel how music sort of recenters Lou in a lot of ways. I mean, when he feels like he's hit a wall, there's anger. It's like all of a sudden he's going to turn up David Banner and just like turn up the song Mississippi. And then at some point he's going to listen to like Mose Allison, right? The great jazz pianist. Obviously music is very important to the centering of Lou, it seems, as he's behind the wheel. And there's got to be a great soundtrack for this novel. I mean, even towards the end, where you have a Terry Jacks reference to his song Season in the Sun, which is just one of my favorite, saddest songs ever. And if anybody's watching this, if you want to go down a wormhole, Google the Terry Jacks video of him singing Seasons in the Sun. It is the most outstanding leather suit, leisure suit you will ever see in your life. And he's singing it so sincerely. But what is it about music? What would the soundtrack be?
The soundtrack, I mean, the obvious common denominator is they were my Mississippi artists. So I'm not sure all of them were, but most of them were in the book. But I tried not to be too specific. I just said he put in this artist. I don't give you the track. I don't give it, except maybe with few exceptions. And so I've been trying to get a playlist together because I was asked for one. And I found it really difficult, and I'm still working on it a year later, and I'm kind of getting close. As to the song, the Seasons in the Sun song, a friend of mine is Tim Quirk from Too Much Joy, and that was the band who did the punk version of Seasons in the Sun.
I didn't know there was
I highly recommend. I love that version so much, and so that's clearly on the playlist. As is so he's not Mississippi, but he made the playlist, obviously.
Yeah. You got Al Green on there, right?
Of course, I've got Al Green on there, and I tried to, put in everybody from there. Lou goes into Memphis too, so I try to include that as well.
Yeah.
But there's so many great artists that you find yourself leaving people out, and that's tragic but inevitable.
Yeah.
And of course, there's he does use music as therapy. And specifically, he has to bring out the CD Mississippi by David Banner when he's road raging, because the anger in that CD is even greater than his.
Yeah.
And it calms him down. Also, it's a brilliant CD. I love it.
Yeah. I wasn't familiar with David or that song until I read your novel, and I went there, and anybody should just listen to it. And it's pretty intense and on point and very, very powerful, so I could see that, like, for Lou going, okay, turning that up and then having it calm him down in some kind of weird way,
Yeah. It was really, David Banner let us use those lyrics too. There's a lot of musicians that will charge you a lot to use lyrics in books. We tried to pay him, and they didn't want money from us, and that was awesome. And I was really grateful for that. But in general, putting music into books is tempting but sketchy. In terms of writing about a cab driver, you have to do it, because how are you going to get through the day otherwise?
Right.
I mean, it's part of the job.
So let me ask this, writing this novel, working very close to the bone, but trying to create separation as well. What was the hardest part about writing The Last Taxi Driver? Where were you most challenged in the writing process of it?
Two things come to mind. The first is paranoia, because I'm a pretty paranoid person, and so I'm always worried I'm going to get sued. Can I write this? Can I not write this? What am I allowed to do? And it had been 20 years since I published a book, so I'm a novice at that point. So that was very difficult but that's just, my own personal liabilities. As to the book itself, the structure was tough, because as I mentioned earlier, the structure of a cab driver is not conducive to a novel. Mm-hmm. You have random characters you never see again constantly, right? Mm-hmm. And when I drove at night, I could never have written a novel about riding at night. During the day, you're getting people to work. So if you don't get there on time and get them to work on time, they get fired. So there's a lot of stress in daytime taxi driving. Mm-hmm. But it's also repeat customers throughout the day. Yeah. And also customers who have accounts with you. So you have repeat customers. And because of that quality of day shift driving, you can help me to structure a novel around it, mm-hmm. Which would have been impossible to do otherwise. So structure was very tough in terms of writing a novel. I didn't want to write a Canterbury Tales where everything stands alone. I wanted to have rising action. I wanted to have plot getting increasingly more interesting. but there was a lot of challenges to that inherent in the structure. So I did the best I could. I hope it.
Oh, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand like you wrote this while putting in like 70-hour workdays driving as well, right?
Well, no, I
Oh, okay.
thought about it constantly while doing that, but I
Yeah.
was too exhausted. I could never have done that.
Okay.
I I I hate to admit this, but I really didn't start writing the novel until I'd gone through. I quit my original taxi company, Angel Taxi, and started working for Flying Tuck, which I had to start driving at night again.
Yeah.
And they were these little electric carts that were the most dangerous vehicles in the world. If you got in a wreck, you literally got hit in your body. So, and that didn't offer me any more free time, but it did offer me, it paid well. And so I finally got to buy my own car. And then I started driving for Uber and doing runs to Memphis and airport runs on my own. And that allowed me enough time to start writing the novel. But I wasn't, one of the frustrations of that time was not being able to write and recognize that this was the most amazing, worth writing about thing I'd ever experienced, but the fatigue was just too much. And I worried I was just going to forget it all. So when I finally had time, I just poured out of me. But I was so sure I was going to waste that material. And I don't even like talking about it as material. It's life, you know.
Cody's back.
Hey guys, this has been great. I could listen to you all night. Really great stuff. But we did have a few questions, so I wanted to just chime back in and see if we could do that in the last bit of time we got. So Lee, I mentioned earlier, we got a message from Dan Christians, who of course Craig knows, and a lot of people in the book biz. He's been a long time Norton rep, so long that he sold your Rise of the Midway back in the day. And no, it's a good thing, great thing. And so he was very pleased to see that, you know, Norton distributes Tin House, and he was psyched to see that Last Taxi Driver came out, and has been a big fan of that. But I failed to mention the title of your memoir, Stalking Shakespeare. And so Dan was asking about that and wondering if you might be willing to just talk about it. And of course, like any Q&A, you don't have to if you don't want to. We can
Really? I have the option to just like say no? That seems rude. That's a book about obsession. I don't want to pitch it as a book about Shakespeare. It's not a scholarly book. It's a memoir about something I don't quite understand, which is my obsession with Shakespeare portraits. I understand I had a good Shakespeare instructor in the University of Arkansas when I was 19, and I became interested in the Elizabethans. But somehow over the decades, that snowballed into a fascination with portraits, 400-year-old portraits, and trying to identify unidentified portraits. A lot of portraits from that era are unknown man, unknown woman. And so I started trying to identify unknown sitters, which became my hobby, is a weird hobby. And then I got struck on the idea of finding a portrait of Shakespeare that was painted from life, and no one has ever found one of those. But at the time I was doing this, the internet had just started having online galleries. And these online galleries from museums would show not only their portraits on display, but also the portraits that had been in storehouses for 100 years or longer. And many people had never seen these portraits in storehouses before. So I figured this would give me a leg up, that if there was a lost or misidentified portrait of Shakespeare, I would have access to it, whereas nobody else had ever had access to it. So that really fueled my search. And then I became fascinated with getting museums and talking museum curators into X-raying and infrareding their portraits to see, if you look at a 400-year-old portrait, you're looking at overpaint, 400 years of touching up, making the portrait prettier, censoring things you don't want to be on the surface. And you're looking at a draft that's been going on 400 years. But the first draft is underneath the paint. And you can get to that draft either by x-rays or infrareds sometimes. Sometimes you cannot. Sometimes it's lost forever. And so I thought, wouldn't it be fascinating to get all these portraits that are maybe possibly Shakespeare and get them x-rayed and infrareded? And I got really good at talking curators into doing this, even though it's a very expensive project and a lot of work. I was just so OCD about it. They would finally agree to do it, and so that's part of the book too. It doesn't solve the mystery of Shakespeare, but it definitely offers new layers of Shakespeare, and it approaches Shakespeare not religiously, and even that is unique, because people who write about Shakespeare tend to be Bartologists, and I'm not in that extent, so it's an irreverent look at Shakespeare as well.
Wow, well, that's great. Oh, can't wait. Let's see what else. Brian Casey says when y'all were talking about Willie Vlotton, he mentioned a guy named Chuck Prophet that has a radio show that turned him on to your work. So, do you know Chuck Prophet or?
I know the name. Yeah. I know Chuck from Twitter.
Nice.
But
well, he's
no, I'm not familiar with the radio show.
Wow, I'm not familiar with the podcast, but that's great that Chuck was promoting the novel like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very nice of me. Very nice to hear. Thank you.
What else? Somebody says, I love Last Taxi Driver, loved Lou. Any chance of a comeback? Hey, are we gonna hear from him again?
I don't know. I feel like that's definitely doable, but I have had so little free time for writing since the pandemic kicked in, and I've just been buried in this memoir and having to read one Elizabethan book after another, that I really haven't had time to even go there. But it's possible, yeah. If I can find the voice again and feel like I have something to say with it, I could see doing that.
And somebody else asked, what are you reading? I can see a pretty nice selection right there behind you.
Yeah, I'm glad somebody asked that. I just read Melissa Ginsberg's A House Uptown, and for fans of her Sunset City, they might be a little disappointed because it reads like it was written by a different author. It's like if Peter Taylor had possessed Melissa Ginsberg. I love Sunset City, but The House Uptown is a beautiful, mature, wonderful page turner. So I highly recommend Melissa's new book. And she's fast becoming, we live in a town that's thick with writers, and the hierarchy of who should be, who is not always correct. Melissa's as good a writer as anybody in this town, and not better. She's immensely gifted.
Lee, what was that? I think you should share that conversation you and I had when we were bouncing this back and forth. The book that surprised you just read recently.
Okay. I've got it here. I'm almost embarrassed. I'll show you the author and see if you can guess who it is. There he is. My man,
yeah, but I'm
Ethan
not
Hawke,
spoiled.
who formerly I was not fond of until about 3 weeks ago. Now he's my hero, and I have a crush on him. Ethan Hawke is a writer. I don't know. Apparently, he's a good actor as well. I've always thought that good writing comes out of experience. This was one of the most fast. I mean, it's about a Shakespearean actor, so obviously it's in my wheelhouse. But it's a very dark, funny, raunchy book, and it's just steeped in experience. He knows what he's writing about, and it's a humble book, and it's a spiritual book too, which I didn't expect. So a friend sent it to me, and I thought it was just a practical joke. And she said, he writes a lot like you write. And he also went 20 years between books. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And then I looked at the jacket photo, and I was like, yeah, fuck you, Ethan.
He might have made a little more money in between
the first paragraph, and kept reading. And he writes a lot like Martin Amis. You can tell that our influences are similar. So we do write a little bit alike. And he has so much to say, and he's funny. And getting back to the idea of experience equals good writing, which I'd really like to emphasize. Life experience is really the best thing you can do as a writer. Like he has three of the best sex scenes I've read in years, right? And if you think about it, it makes sense that Ethan Hawke would be able to write great sex scenes, right? Experience, right? He's not like sitting up in an English department trying to conjure up a sex scene. He's going like, do I want to use this one or use this one or use this one? So experience equals good writing. I believe that. I'll believe that till the day I die. And though I was rooting against this book for at least 100 pages, hats off to Ethan Hawke. This is an excellent novel. So there's my Ethan. And I know he needs the money and everything, so I wanted to give him that pitch. And also we should point out that A Place Like Mississippi came out today. And, Ralph's a friend and an excellent writer. And this is filled with all sorts of history and folklore of our area. And this is the Oxford Conference of the Book. Chris Hofford has been nice to me, great to me, has another wonderful novel coming out, The Killing Hills. Mary Miller's paperback, Biloxi, came out this year. She's one of my favorite authors. And without Mary, I would probably be lost because she served as my first reader, my editor. She's held my hand for years. And I'm so grateful for everything she's done. And I'm rereading George Singleton these days. So I just have his book up.
Nothing but trouble. Absolutely.
Great writer.
Nothing
Yeah,
but
amazing
trouble.
writer. So
that's my experiences with that guy.
Yeah.
Have you guys read, obviously, what I love about Oxford is just it continues to evolve the literary scene down there. And, my time spent with Larry and Buddy Norden, but just to see, like, one of my favorite books in the last year is Amy's World of Wonders. And she's just, what an exciting new voice to have down in Oxford, Mississippi. But I just think World of Wonders is just a tremendous, tremendous book and unexpected, for like, when I think about Oxford in the literary scene, for Amy to come out with a book like that and be part of that Oxford literary scene, it was just very, very exciting.
Yeah, we're pretty blessed here for sure. There's a lot of great writers for sure. What else? Anything else you guys want to say or talk about?
I just can't believe I'm, in Oxford sort of without a drink in my hand. So this is very awkward.
I'm in Oxford with a drink in my hand. I also wanted to, mention, I read this one on Kindle, but Katie Simpson Smith's The Everlasting is an excellent, ambitious, beautiful novel. And I just wanted to put that book out there. If anybody's looking for a great read, funny, raunchy at times, but beautiful, beautiful language.
I didn't hear that first part you said, but it is a really good book. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Are we running short on time? Were you cutting me off?
No, I'm just messing around. Well, I don't know. This has been so great, you guys, and I'm so glad that y'all got to meet each other because you're two of my favorite people, and just couldn't be happier for Lee and this book, and also Craig. You're doing great things at Tin House, and thanks for oh wait, one quick thing, if you can make this story short. So Craig like brainstorm, like, I'm so excited about Lee's book, and we have all these great writers in Oxford, and Ray Thompson and Ace and I were like, maybe we could get cabs in New York and like pay for billboards and all this stuff. Maybe we could do this and that. And we had all these like schemes, like pump it up. And so I called Craig and I'm like, what do y'all got going on? He's like, we're thinking about air fresheners. And so do you remember that conversation? Because Craig's like, yeah, man, I think we're on it, but didn't quite go the way we thought it would.
I'll just say this: we got some samples in, and they were so toxic. You just felt like, you were going through something very serious. Your eyes were bleeding. Everything. We're like, we can't do this to anybody. I mean, those promotional air fresheners, I'm not sure what they're dipped in, but each one was like a super fun sight. And I was like, this is not a good thing. Maybe when you're in the back of Lou's car and all the smells. I mean, you have, what's the chapter called? Stink bomb or something like that at the very beginning of the book. But to open up an air freshener with a book, I think it would have just hurt a lot of people.
Yeah, we gave
You're
them out at
thinking about-
readings, and I had to beg people not to open them because I was like, we would literally have to leave. We would have to leave the building.
Yeah.
They smelled, yeah, like beating a trout to death with a lemon or something is how it smelled. Yeah, and also we weren't allowed to use the logo from the book. You know, the because we, you know, I got worried about being sued for that because that was whatever copyrighted. So it didn't look that good. It was a disappointment. But let me tell you that everything with, and I'm going to wrap this up quick, Cody, but everything with working with Tin House has been incredible and been one of the great pleasures of my life. And starting with the art department, as we spoke about earlier, the work they've done, but the work everybody has done at Tin House. Tony Perez has been a great editor. Everybody has been kind and helpful. And to come back into publishing after 20 years of rejections and be treated that way with a publishing house that's that on point was, I'll be grateful for that for the rest of my life. I thank you, Tin House.
Thank you, Lee.
Well, right on. And thanks, Lee, for doing this. We got signed copies of Last Taxi Driver. Craig, thanks for all that you do. Support your indie businesses and support your indie bookstores. And yeah, let's make a date. Like next year, Craig's coming down.
Oh yeah.
We'll go fishing and drink some
Set me up with
bourbon.
a ride.
Yeah, we'll
you hear David
Leo
Banner
run us around. We'll
blaring,
go low run
you know.
Larry Brown style.
There you go. That would be a lot of fun, man. All right.
Everybody.
Thank you, Square Books. Thanks, Lee.
Yeah, thank you, Square Books.
All right. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks,
Take care.
Cody.